You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
Have you ever strolled through Flushing Meadows Corona Park and wondered what lies beneath your feet? Let me take you back to a time when, instead of lush greenery, millions of pounds of ash choked the land. This isn't just urban legend, it's the legacy of a 100-foot-tall ash dump, once called the closest thing to a literal hell on Earth. Why did New York need such a colossal trash heap? The answer? Coal. When coal was king, every crackling fire left behind not just warmth, but a heavy, gritty problem. Picture this, an entire community haunted by endless clouds of smoke and dust, their lives governed by the city's insatiable appetite for energy. Today, that toxic legacy is buried, hidden, and all but forgotten beneath the park's fields and playgrounds. But how did it get there, and what does it mean for us now? Let's dig into the secretive past of New York's lost ash dumper story that's as much about environmental reckoning as it is about urban transformation. Now, you might be thinking, can a park's beauty really mask such a grim history? Absolutely. Let me show you how an industrial wasteland became a symbol of renewal and why its buried ashes still matter. Along the way, we'll unravel terms like particulate matter, tiny solid fragments that can make the air dangerous to breathe, and landfill, which, in this context, means more than just a place to toss trash. It's the hidden foundation for modern city life. Ready to journey beneath the surface? Let's go. This is the story of New York's forgotten ash dump, and how the city's dirtiest past became one of its greenest presents. Let's set the stage. The late 19th century, New York is booming, morphing from a bustling port into a true industrial giant. The Industrial Revolution wasn't slow, it was turbocharged, and nowhere was this more dramatic than in New York City. With its vast harbor, the city became America's processing center, a middleman for the nation's raw and finished goods. Picture steel mills belching smoke, ships unloading cotton, timber, and iron ore, every shipment feeding the city's relentless hunger for coal. But here's the twist. With every ton of coal burned, another problem grew wash. Think of ash as the Industrial Revolution's dirty secret, the inevitable byproduct of progress. And as factories multiplied, so did the city's waste. If you've ever wondered about the term byproduct, it's basically the unglamorous leftovers from making something useful like the crumpled paper after wrapping a gift, but much, much dirtier. Now you might ask, why didn't they just dump it anywhere? Well, as the city grew, so did the need for organized disposal. Random dumping was a fire hazard. Imagine uncontrolled ash piles catching fire and spreading through dense neighborhoods. So the city got creative, designating special places ash dumps for its unwanted leftovers. This wasn't just a New York story. Across America, cities faced the same challenge: how to power progress without choking on its consequences. And so the ash dump was born a necessary evil in the march toward modernity. The real question is, how did New York's ash dump become so infamous, and what made it different from any other city solution? Let's find out. Now, let's talk ash dumps, a phrase that might sound dull but is packed with drama. Early on, humans dumped waste, including ash, far from where they lived. But as cities swelled, so did the problem. Enter the era of organized waste management. In New York, things got serious. Factories and homes alike had to dispose of their ashes, and it was no longer a simple backyard affair. Imagine horse carts rumbling through narrow streets, collecting barrels not just of ash, but every imaginable kind of filth-rotting food, broken furniture, even, sometimes, personal documents. These carts made regular trips to local dumps or, for bigger jobs, to rail sidings. Rail siding, by the way, means those extra tracks where factories could load up their waste for transport, a kind of industrial driveway. You might be thinking, wasn't this dangerous? Absolutely. Unchecked ash piles could spark fires or send clouds of dust swirling through neighborhoods. That's why city regulations eventually demanded more professional handling. Enter the Ashman sanitation workers, whose job was to collect and cart away the city's dirty secrets. This shift from chaos to order marked the beginning of modern waste management, a system for handling what nobody wanted to see, touch, or smell. For New York, it was only the beginning of a much bigger mess. So, how did Corona become the city's designated dumping ground? And what happened when all that ash finally settled? Let's keep digging. Now for the main stage, the Corona Ash Dump. This wasn't your average trash heap, it was a colossal monument to urban excess. For over 26 years, New York poured its ash into Flushing Meadows. At its peak, the dump sprawled across 300 acres. Imagine an area bigger than 225 football fields, blanketed by gray hills and ridges. One mound, nicknamed Mount Corona, soared 100 feet high, higher than an 8-story building. Every day, barges and trains delivered new loads, turning the landscape into what if. Scott Fitzgerald famously called the Valley of Ashes. If you've read The Great Gatsby, you'll remember his description: grotesque gardens, powdery air, and men moving like ghosts among the dust. That's not just fiction. It was daily life for thousands. But here's the twist. The dump wasn't just ugly. It was alive with smells, smoke, and even stories. Imagine walking past a mountain of ash so vast it could fill 39 Olympic swimming pools. That's not hyperbole. It's a rough estimate of the dump's volume. Now you might wonder, if it was so bad, why didn't they stop? Simply put, the city's need for energy and a place to hide its waste outweighed the suffering of local residents. The Corona Ash Dump became a symbol of what happens when progress forgets the people who live in its shadow. Next, let's get personal. What was it like to live near the Valley of Ashes? Hold your nose because it's about to get unpleasant. Let's step into the shoes of a Queens resident in the 1920s. Each morning, you wake up to the stench of burning ash and the sight of gray dust swirling outside your window. This wasn't just a minor annoyance, it was a public health nightmare. The air was thick with particulate matter, tiny ash particles that, when inhaled, could cause asthma, bronchitis, and worse. But the trouble didn't stop there. Heavy metals and toxic chemicals from the ash leached into the soil and waterways, raising the risk of cancers and neurological disorders for anyone living nearby. And because regulations were lax, nobody really knew how dangerous this stew of pollutants was until it was too late. Now, you might ask, why didn't residents just move? For many, moving wasn't an option. Jobs, family, and poverty kept them anchored. Let me tell you a story. One family, living just a block away, described how their laundry would turn gray within hours of hanging outside. Even children's toys were coated in dust. It was a daily struggle with no real escape. In technical terms, what they suffered from was environmental exposure, long-term contact with hazardous substances in their surroundings. Even today, we use that phrase to talk about the risks of living near pollution. The reality? The Corona Ash Dump wasn't just a blight on the landscape, it was a health crisis. But as we'll see, it wasn't only humans who found the dump irresistible. It's time to meet some unlikely beneficiaries of the Corona Ash Dump rats. Not your average alley dwellers, but a supersized, thriving population that feasted on the city's waste. Why did the dump attract them? Think of it as a massive open-air buffet. Discarded food scraps, endless hiding spots, and no natural predators in sight. By the 1930s, the situation spiraled out of control. Rats spilled into nearby neighborhoods, contaminating food supplies and causing panic. Newspapers ran headlines about rat plagues, and the city declared a full-blown rodent war. Vector, a technical term, refers to any creature that spreads disease, and these rats were vectors in every sense, carrying bacteria and parasites into homes and businesses. Now, you might be thinking, how did the city fight back? Extermination campaigns launched traps and poisons in waves, but the rats were persistent. The dump scale made total elimination impossible. Let me paint a picture. At night, the dump came alive with movement as thousands of rats scurried across the ash, a living symbol of unchecked urban decay. This wasn't just a nuisance, it was a major public health threat. But change was coming. With the city's eyes set on the future, a radical transformation was about to begin. The question was, could a landscape so blighted ever become beautiful again? So, what finally tipped the scales? In the mid-1930s, New York won the bid to host the 1939 World's Fair, a chance to show off the city's best face to the world. Suddenly, the Corona Ash Dump wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a crisis that demanded a solution. City planner Robert Moses, known for his sweeping urban projects, seized the moment. In 1934, the city bought the dump from the Brooklyn Ash Removal Company, and Moses set out to transform the wasteland into something extraordinary. Flushing Meadows Park. But let's not sugarcoat it, the task was monumental. The dump's sheer volume, an estimated 50 million cubic yards, made simply relocating the ash impossible. Instead, Moses needed ingenuity. He would have to reinvent the landscape itself. Now, you might wonder, did they just cover the mess and call it a day? Not quite. The next steps involved creative, if imperfect, engineering shaping, covering, and reclaiming the land. It was the beginning of a new era for Queens. But before we talk about the park's rebirth, let's take a brief detour to the area's even older history and how its original nature helped shape its future. Long before steam engines and smokestacks, Flushing Meadows was a tranquil salt marsh landscape shaped by flowing waters and rich biodiversity. The name itself comes from the Dutch word vingen, meaning stream or flowing water, a nod to the area's original wetlands. When Dutch settlers arrived in the early 1600s, they called the place Vishing, after a picturesque town in the Netherlands. Imagine a peaceful expanse of marshland, home to birds and fish, a far cry from the ash-choked wasteland it would become. Now, you might be thinking, how could such a beautiful place become a dump? The answer is simple but sad. As New York industrialized, open spaces were seen as opportunities for disposal, not preservation. The marsh was drained, filled, and forgotten. But here's the twist. When Robert Moses set out to transform the ash dump, he wasn't just covering up the past, was, in some small way, restoring the land to its natural role as a communal green space. This interplay between destruction and renewal is a pattern seen in cities worldwide. In technical terms, it's called urban reclamation, the process of converting damaged land back into something useful or beautiful. Let's see how that played out at Flushing Meadows. Turning a 300-acre dump into a world-class park wasn't as simple as hauling the mess away. In fact, most of the ash stayed put, forming the base for new landscapes. The process, called landfill capping, meant covering the old waste with soil and reshaping the terrain to make it safe and usable, a bit like putting icing on a burnt cake. Landscapers worked to grade and smooth the land, redistributing ash to fill low spots and create a more inviting topography. While these methods seem primitive by today's standards, at the time, they were considered cutting edge. A key term here is topography, the arrangement of natural and artificial features on the land's surface, which Moses and his team completely reinvented. Now, you might ask, didn't people worry about lingering pollution? The truth is, environmental regulations were minimal. The goal wasn't full remediation, but creating a functional, attractive park. Some hazardous materials were probably removed or isolated, but most ash simply vanished beneath new lawns and pathways. Let me tell you, not everyone was thrilled. Some workers feared losing their jobs, and a few even argued that the dump was unfairly maligned. Still, for most New Yorkers, the park's creation was a triumpha phoenix rising from the ashes. So, what's the legacy of this transformation? And how do we remember the Valley of Ashes today? Let's wrap up our story with a look at its lasting impact. Today, Flushing Meadows Corona Park is a symbol of renewal, a place where families picnic, kids play, and nature has reclaimed a scarred landscape. But deep below the soccer fields and lakes, the ashes of America's industrial past still linger, a buried reminder of both the costs and benefits of progress. American novelist Jonathan Lethem once wrote, "Outside of probably hell, there is no literal landscape as forlorn and soul-crushing as the ash dumps of Corona, Queens." It's hard to imagine now, with the park's vibrant life, that this was once a place of misery and decay. Now you might be asking, what can we learn from this history? First, that every city carries hidden stories beneath its surface, sometimes beautiful, sometimes ugly, always instructive. Second, that urban reinvention requires both vision and vigilance. Technical terms like environmental remediation, the process of cleaning up pollution, remind us how far we've come and how much further we need to go. Let me leave you with this. The next time you visit a park, remember that its beauty may rest, quite literally, on the ashes of history. Our job is to honor that past while building a cleaner, greener future. Thanks for joining me on this journey through New York's lost ash dump. Until next time, I'm Ryan Soj, signing off.